Good afternoon. It's my pleasure and such a pleasure and an honor to introduce Michelle Grabner. Michelle wears many hats, which is something we encourage many of you to do in your lives as artists. Michelle is an artist, a curator, a writer, a professor. Put another way, she teaches, she writes, she makes paintings and sculptures, she makes exhibitions, and she also, importantly, makes opportunities for other artists, notably through the Suburban and the Poor Farm project spaces that she started a little while back with her husband, the artist Brad Killam. I believe they started, I've read this, I haven't confirmed it, the Suburban in their backyard in the outskirts of Chicago, and then moved it to Milwaukee. And the Poor Farm, I think, is near their cottage out in the country where they go in the summer. So in preparing for this introduction, I came across a 2015 hyperallergic review of Michelle's solo exhibition, 2015, I think, at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. And after listing the various professional roles that Michelle plays that I just discussed, the author of this review, Janet Tyson, wrote, at the same time, she's a wife and a mother, but instead of pushing the personal side of her life into the background, Grabner successfully assimilates it into her art. This is a difficult, perhaps dangerous path to navigate. The domestic and personal are accorded critical attention, but more often when cast as dysfunctional. In other words, we're allowed to talk about things like parenthood and the domestic sphere as artists only when we do so in a more critical light and think of them as dysfunctional. Grabner, by contrast, presents the domestic as a relatively positive creative force. Perhaps this is her Midwestern roots, I'm not sure. Her philosophical stance translates the mundane into things that can be isolated and recognized as art, but not so completely that their vernacular origins are lost. And this really rang true for me. And I thought it was really significant. I remember the last time I saw Michelle's work in a solo show, it was at James Cohan a few years ago. And if I'm not mistaken, there were paintings that resembled red and white checkered tablecloths. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. I remember I was talking with the gallery director, Paula, about it. And we both agreed that this close attention to this pattern that we're so used to in everyday life in this subtly transformed way did something that we see pretty rarely in contemporary art. And it was really welcome, a kind of, I would say maybe a critical embrace of an element of everyday life. And that's a tradition that is important to the history of 20th century art, from Alan Capro to artists who embrace the domestic and parenthood like Mary Kelly and so many others. Michelle's resume is 19 pages long, and I will not indulge myself as much as I usually do in listing all of her incredible accomplishments, but there have been some solo shows at James Cohan, one of the galleries that represents her, at Ephremidis, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in Berlin, Museum of Contemporary Art, Cleveland, and Minus Space in Brooklyn, Matthew Delegate's gallery. Countless group exhibitions, many reviews written by her and written about her work. Her best known curatorial projects include the 2014 Whitney Biennial, the inaugural Front International in Cleveland, that was in 2018, and Sculpture Milwaukee, and lots of other curatorial projects. Michelle Grabner is the Crown Family Professor of Art at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and she's also taught at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, at Cranbrook, at Bard's MFA program, at Yale, and at Skowhegan. She received a BFA in painting and drawing from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and also an MA in art history there, where it says in Wikipedia she wrote her thesis on postmodern art. something that we talk about sometimes here. And she received an MFA from Northwestern University. Please join me in giving a warm welcome, the esteemed Michelle Grabner.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Isabel, for setting this all up. I think it's important to note that I started teaching at the School of the Art Institute in 1996. So I've been there for quite some time. It is a graduate program that I could not get into myself. So I've been running the Department of Painting and Drawing as chair twice now. And again, it is a department that did not let me into grad school. So very important to keep that in mind. So I am in town. Again, thank you for the invitation, Mark. I'm delighted to be here. I am also going to be working up at Columbia University in the Leroy Neiman print study program, where I'm working on a portfolio. And then before I leave back to the Midwest, I'm going to pop in at Yale and do a little teaching up there. So a nice long stint in your city. Putting together a talk for you is always terribly difficult. Not only do I dislike the authority of being behind a mic, but I also get very uncomfortable with the truth I have to portray to you through images and some bumbly language, because it is not the truth of what one does. Language can't do it, images can't do it, and I've been in this world for a very long time. So every time I sit down and put slides together, I have to create a new fiction, kind of dip into, you know, the many projects that I have done to kind of shape it up. And it's not a great exercise, quite honestly, because like I said, the truth of all of it can't be represented, but I will give it a good try. How I'm going to structure this is I'm going to show you some slides, but I'm also going to read just brief little tenets that I hold dear to the practice and give you some facts that should be silly to you in terms of how the artwork is professionalized and where it lives. And then I'll be a little more discursive in terms of walking through some projects I'm doing now. Most everything you're seeing is very, very recent, last couple of years or so, except for one or two pieces. I have a survey exhibition that I'll talk about that opens up at the Schneider Museum in the middle of April. And like presentations and microphones, survey exhibitions don't do me well. I feel they're backward looking. There's curators and art historians who are writing the catalog essays who can give you shape, but it's not the work I want to do. I want the momentum to keep going forward. So I'm usually typically organized, but if you talk to the curator and director of the survey exhibition, I think they're very ticked off at me because I give it as little attention as I possibly can, but also knowing that I trust them. So, okay. So my work is centered on the redeployment of cliches. As an empty signifier, the cliche David Foster Wallace wrote that cliche My work relies on forms that are broadly knowable and familiar, but also transactionally misleading. I understand my motifs as both empty, treacherous, yet always redeemable. Often my pattern-based works are misunderstood as purely decoration. Yet I am drawn to these sorts of patterns and ornamentations because their organizational structures are skillful at obscuring power. A successful cliche is always unattributable and therefore banal. But by translating and migrating these banalities, art can critically expose and upend copious bounties of unexamined cultural values. My work and its references articulate a variety of temporalities, especially those associated with labor, production, and maintenance. The work is intentionally boring. It is always predictable. And it is misleadingly domestic. It is always about abstraction, even if some abstractions employ representation. My work lives in over 50 public collections, including the Art Institute of Chicago. It makes me happiest when it lives on friends' bookshelves and on their walls. Some work is in storage in luxury Freeports. It is on permanent view in sculpture parks in the Northeast. Poolside at collectors' estates. At the Milwaukee Art Museum, juxtaposed with the Subaru's iconic orange starburst sculpture. Much of it lives out of sight in gallery inventories throughout the world. It graces museum restrooms, but the lion's share of the work can be found in the darkness of numerous flat files and in studio storage. I am grateful to be working in the lineage of Duchamp and Warhol and all of the unoriginal geniuses of the 20th century. Jasper Johns, Salman Hatay, Li Ufan. But I am also in conversation with the work of Anna and Bernard Bluma, Julie Wachtal, Alan McCullum, Ricky Swallow, B. Wertz, and since we're speaking of poetry, William Carlos Williams. Again, the simplicity yet complexity of this poem is stunning to me. And again, thinking about all the cliches here, the red wheelbarrow, complexity of its structure, its literary structure. In the 2014 Whitney Biennial that I co-curated, which included Matthew's work, by the way, and I co-curated it with Anthony Elms and Stuart Comer. It was the last biennial in the Breuer Building, which is now, as we know, the flagship of Sotheby's. The piece in the biennial that still holds with me today is a piece titled Janus by the artist Miljan Ruperto. It ran continuously on a very modest wall monitor. The animation conflates Janus, the god of beginnings and transitions, with the duck rabbit illustration popularized by Ludwig Wittgenstein. So you can see this video online. I wasn't able to pull it from Caddis, but basically you're looking at this image and it breathes and it goes back and forth. And it's this dying creature, both duck and rabbit. It's really just stunning. By animating duck rabbit, Ruperto advances the image's perceptual shift and makes precarious any singular form of identity. The animation not only toggles life to death, but seeds the overworked metaphor with urgent ethical discourses, animal welfare, ecology, conservation, animal cognition, and animal communication. It repeats ambiguity while still daring us to name: rabbit, inhale, duck, collapse, inhale, suffering, death, duck, rabbit, exhale. Okay. Now, so those are the things I hold on to. Those are the things I believe in. Around, again, issues of cliche, that which is found, that which is unoriginal, and doing that transformation of those things. And what happens in those transformations I'll talk about. But before we get there, and again, Mark introduced this, and that is some of the social projects that my husband, Brad Killam, who is here, and I have worked on for a while. This is the Poor Farm. This is the residency program that we run in central Wisconsin. It's a residency program, but it is also anti-residency. Residencies, as we all know, have become an industry in and of itself. So how do you come to the Poor Farm? We send you a Google Doc, you sign up, you show up. Okay. Again, this is rural Wisconsin. Often we have classes, graduate classes from sculpture at the School of the Art Institute who like to either start their academic year or end their academic year. Painting and drawing at the School of the Art Institute is a very large program, so we literally can't host the department that I teach in, but performance comes up there pretty regularly, and other schools from the Midwest will often kind of book some time and come cook together, be in this place together. It also has an exhibition space. Here you get a sense of the landscape. The exhibition space is raw. This is Catarina Grossa, an exhibition by Catarina Grossa. And this year we're doing a Felix Gonzalez Torres exhibition. This is one of his large billboard pieces, and it's a close-up of denim. So again, this piece is really special when when you start thinking about the work that I'm talking about, is that kind of focusing in on something that becomes pattern, right? It's not pants necessarily, it's not garment, but it's still gingham. And what does gingham? It could be queer, right? But it can also be pattern. It can also be about color and indigo and variation, difference and sameness. So that is happening this summer. These are some exhibitions we've had in the past. They often tend to be performative. The Poor Farm closes during the winter. We just can't swing the geothermal system that we would like. But again, we do not write for grants. This is something that's really important. I have spent a lot of my time going in front of committees who want to give me money for exhibitions, but they want to know what you artists who are participating in this exhibition will be doing in 18 months or 3 years. We will support what we know. And I can't do that. I have to tell people that we will support whatever the artist wants, and it may fail. It may not be what they're thinking about doing. And I support that. As a result, money doesn't flush our way, but I don't want to play that kind of not-for-profit game, and nor does my husband. We also have something that's still information. It's the David Graeber Institute. And David Graeber, as we know, did a lot of studying around the history of debt and what debt means. It is a loss. He is no longer with us, but really kind of thinking about what debt means, especially at a poor farm. And some of you don't know what a poor farm is, and I'm not going to go deep into it because Brooklyn Rail did a big interview with me on the poor farm. So if you want to know more about it, you can kind of toggle through Brooklyn Rail and kind of figure out its history. The Suburban, which is now 26 years old. This is its space in Milwaukee in the Walker's Point neighborhood. And what you're looking at here is a Tyree Guyton installation. And then the exhibition space is in the front here. We have a great show by Craig Drennan up right now. And I just want to point out this piece because I think it's really quite great. It's now covered with graffiti. But that steel voting box that you see there is by an artist from Chicago named Inigo Milano Obale. And because Wisconsin is one of those contentious political states, he started to make these ballot drop boxes and is installing them throughout the state, and popped one in front of the Suburban. Okay. We can talk more about kind of the structure of both of these projects. They're long going, and to speak to what Mark was saying, they're long going by the fact that Chicago, if any of you know Chicago, Chicago is really rich both in graduate programs, but also it's almost a prerequisite if you come out of a grad program that you open up a kind of artist-run project space. Like I said, we've been doing this for a very, very long time. And the reason we've done it for a long time is because we had a full family of 3 children, and that means we are located. That means we weren't going to leave Chicago to another place, that we were invested in public school systems. So there's something about the structure of life and the relationship to temporalities in these kinds of spaces. And thus it has been going for quite some time. So I am on sabbatical this year. Like I said, I am leaving 5 years of chairing the painting and drawing program at the School of the Art Institute. And unbeknownst to me, when I just took a deep breath upon leaving chairship in August, I stepped into the Kohler factory in Kohler, Wisconsin. So Kohler, you may know, has a long-going residency program. It's called Arts and Industry. It's been going for 50 years. Ruth Kohler started it back in the day. It's very competitive. We get about 600 applicants every year for 12 spots. 6 artists will be assigned to the pottery section where they do slip casting, and 6 will be assigned to the foundry where it's sand casting and iron and brass pouring. I am a curator for the Kohler Company. So I work for Laura Kohler and I manage her collection and get it out into the world. At some point, we had a conversation about creating an adjacent residency She wanted to call it Makerspace, and it's called Makerspace, but it is invitational. So she said, Michelle, you started out and kind of give us a sense of what's going on here. How can we use this other space to make work? So this is where I've been since the beginning of September, and I will continue to be there through August. And I'll walk you through what goes on there. This is my station where I make plaster molds. This is the area in which I take an object that I want to cast. Usually it's something found, but other artists can create a form and then make a plaster mold. And this is me making plaster molds of cabbages. So you can see where I'm actually using the cabbage and creating a very simple two-part mold. And this is the result of that. Then I go down to the casting area. And in this case, starting those plaster molds, the mold I just showed you with the cabbage flying everywhere. I started those in January, and now I have hundreds of very different. So that's not all the same. I made many plaster molds. So it's not the same cabbage head. There's multiple cabbage heads. And they're all oil painted. So I am kind of pushing at I have been using glaze. The glazes are offered. Now, Kohler Company, and again, you should all know Kohler Company because you probably used a bathroom and a toilet today that had Kohler on the back of it. So toilets, urinals, bathtubs, sinks. They have their in-house glazes, and there's not a subtlety necessarily to this glazes, and I'll show you some of those, some examples of glaze work, but like I said, these are all oil painted. Okay, this is the casting floor. This is where I'm working when I'm casting those plaster molds and pouring slip. This is how you can see the molds on the casting tables. You see those cones. I fill those cones up every morning. The slip line shuts down at 9. I bring these big hoses. If you can see those red hoses in the back, they're heavy. They're like a fire hose. And I have to fill each one of those cones up. Some of those molds I can cast twice a day, but not for much longer than a week because the molds get saturated. In addition to cabbages, I've been making hundreds of potatoes. And again, oil painted. You get an example here. I was just packing them up yesterday. This is the kiln. So they have this kiln that runs 24/7. They have these large carts that kind of move slowly. It's a 40-hour kiln. You put something on this cart, it keeps running. 40 hours later, you pull the wear off the cart, right? It's cool, it's dry. So I'll give you an example of the kind of franticness that I've been working on. So I have proper projects that I'm working on for exhibitions, but when you're at the intersection of your ideas, domesticity, industry, and all of these processes, something has become very frantic for me because I will not have this experience again, nor should I have this experience again. So I can set up a real fancy ass ceramic studio basement of the poor farm, and I'm never going to be able to achieve the kind of work that can happen here. So it really is about thinking about that which is industrial, which is very different than that which is innovative, right? Or thinking about entrepreneurial think. That's not me at all. I'm of a different generation. So when you're in a factory and you're seeing toilets and urinals come off the line, or bathtubs being hung on their way to enameling in mass, just hundreds and hundreds a day, when you are there working, you become your own kind of Fortis production, and it's frantic, let me tell you. And I'm sure I have my own kind of think here, but it feels a little bit as if I'm a squirrel kind of hoarding acorns for a long winter. And it's going to be, as we all know, I think we're headed to a dark, cold cultural winter very soon. So when you see all these things that I'm firing, I'm storing them to be painted in retirement. I'm just thinking about end of the life, perpetual work and ideas. So what you're seeing here again is toast, is egg cartons. You see those little pegs that get stuck into your plants, graham crackers, aluminum pans, cornflake boxes. I've been thinking a lot about Mangold, Sylvia Mangold, and thinking about just casting rulers that I can just for these dark, cold cultural winters, just again, in a kind of verisimilitude, paint rulers. And also these little pea screens. I don't visit urinals very often, but again, casting these pea screens as well. This is a large dump mold. You can see the slip. Slip is like chocolate milkshake. And this is the result of that dump mold. All of these very common Rubbermaid buckets that are now porcelain and glazed. Sometimes my dump molds don't work and I have this strange, anomalous, beautiful form. That is great. I will save it. I will fire it, but it is anomalous to me. It is not part of my production. It sets out as an artifact of the process. What you're looking at here, again, you see part of the mold. I've been working on bottom of pans. You know, the sheet pans, they come with various anti-stick structural organizational patterns. I'm working on a series of those. You can get a sense of them here. We're looking at non-slip floor signs. And I want to spend a little time talking about this installation. So this is all the work that I made at the Kohler for 2 months in the fall. It came on view and still is on view at the Haggerty Museum of Art at Marquette University. And as an artist at Kohler, you are welcome to their cull. Cull means the sinks that don't meet their standards. They still have to be A1. That means they're not going to break if you install them. You're not going to cut yourself, but there is a swell to them, or there's a glaze that didn't cover that full corner. So I was able to get 5 of these sinks, and then all of the janitorial accoutrements around these sinks. 90% of them I made at the factory. Some of the works I made at my foundry are metal cast, and some of them are silver leafed. So let's talk a little bit about this project. And this talks about interpretation and how we think about ideas around our own work. So, you know, absolutely, we should understand this work as janitorial. We should think about janitorial labor both in the home, but also in institutions. You know, some of our janitors are beloved. Some of them, sometimes they're men, sometimes they're women, sometimes they're people of color. But for the most part, the expectation of an orderly, hygienic institution is always at play. So when does this work happen? So we ask ourselves a very important question, given the world we're living in: who does janitorial work? Who do we see do janitorial work? And where do we see the janitorial artifacts? They're always back of the house, right? Everything is back of the house or in that closet with the door closed, right? We as institutions and as architects put all of this labor out of sight, right? Really important question to ask ourselves, a sociological question to ask ourselves, a political question to ask, right? Okay, yes, this work should do that. I accept that, and I will have conversations with you about that. But something else is happening as well. There's a transformation of material. So even those mats that you're seeing there, those kind of Home Depot common mats, are cast, and then I finish them. Everything in the sink is, again, transposed, right? So there is a kind of illusion to all of this. So what does that mean? That means we don't really see it, right? That's the idea of the janitorial labor. People walk into, and it's kind of a frontal, it's kind of front of the house in this museum. And people walk right by as if it's construction work. I intentionally left the holes in the sink so it wasn't plumbed, right? To give some clues to that, that this is not what you think you see. But if you spend time to see that kind of transformation, something interesting happens. But really important, and I'm going to go back a little bit, and we should talk about form and formal arrangement. I'm a big proponent of how active we can interpret form. Form is not about taste, right? Form is not a form is about affordances, right? So what are we looking at here? Where does repetition? What is predictable? We got 5 sinks, we got 5 mats. Right? There is something very stable about how those objects work in this space. And then we see the stuff around it. That stuff around it is not necessarily organized, right? There is a little disorganization to it. Is it chaotic? Not really, because again, those sinks give a kind of framework and structure for that which is a little more random, a little quicker, a little faster. So start thinking about that, but think about it when we transpose it to other societal conditions, right? Where do we need that which is fixed? What do we need to be dependable? What can be chaotic and out of order, Those are really important things we bring to every object, every time we make an art, whether a piece of art, whether it's painting, whether it's sculpture, we're thinking about those things. We have ideas behind it, but the formal vocabulary should be interpreted. There's so much going on in that formal vocabulary. Form is always about order, and order is always political. Don't forget that, right? So don't be afraid of form and formal conversations. That can be about color, that can be about surface, that can be about composition, should be about all of those things. That is what the conversation around all of my work, that is where it's really important. We had that conversation about labor. That's very profound, but we can go farther. Art can go farther when we start to tease it apart, right? When we can start thinking about that which is located, that which is discombobulated. Where is balance? Where is discord, right? And then how do we think about that in the structures of our life? Really important. And then, of course, also thinking about, as I was saying, the transformation of material. People will walk by it or people will be captured, but then also thinking about attention, right? We talk about attention. We want to be in control of our attention. We don't want something else to control our attention. So spend time with it perhaps, or walk by, that's fine. But again, I want to stretch our relationship to the temporalities of what captures our imagination and our interpretation. I think a lot about Susan Sontag and Against Interpretation. And that was written in the late 60s. And that was a very important piece of writing in which she was saying no more interpretation. And at that point, go think back to the 60s, right? And what was going on in the 60s? We had disorder. The same time we were understanding our planet from visual images that we've never seen it before. It was vulnerable. It was blue. It needed protection. But there were those who saw a possibility of exploitation as well. When Sontag was writing Against Interpretation, she was speaking up for artists, that the critics at that point were usurping the imagination of art and artists, literary artists, visual artists as well. So at that point, she was saying, let the artist speak. I profoundly respect that piece. I actually want to swing back. We're in a different context right now. And I think right now we need more interpretation, right? So just walking you through this installation, I want you to know that I'm not hanging on to any singular idea, right? I learn from people who come. I will learn from you. You will give me some feedback in terms of what you're seeing. But again, I don't go to the work and make a script of what it needs to be. And if people do not interpret it that way, I'm not wrong and neither are they, right? It has the potential of moving and changing. We all get together and talk about this in 10 years, we're going to have a full on different conversation. So I have a real hard time with locking down, and even these lectures, I have a real hard time giving ideas. I gave you some tenets at the beginning of this lecture, but even putting those in place seem a little fraudulent because in 10 years, I don't know that they will be true, right? Things will change. Okay. All right. This exhibition also was stimulated by a piece in the permanent collection of the Haggerty by August Saunders. This is Cleaning Woman. It's a photograph from 1928. He, at that point, Saunders was a German photographer, and he was taking photographs of the working day folk. And this is from a portfolio called Servants from People of the 20th Century. And because I knew this was going to be in the permanent collection while I was asked to work on this commission, this kind of moved me forward into thinking of the installation I just showed you. Again, more work around the janitorial. This is Dwayne Hansen's Janitor from 1973. This lives at the Milwaukee Art Museum. You can see the crystal wool in the back, but it's this kind of fiberglass figure that just leans permanently against the wall. Unfortunately, has a little taped off area. This German couple who really has been very important to me since I saw their work in the early 90s at MoMA. It's called, this suite is called Kitchen Frenzy. It's from 1986. And it's by the couple, the Blumas, Anna and Bernard Bluma. They studied under Beuys at the Dusseldorf Academy, but really looking at the domestic interior gone amok, potatoes flying at their own volition. Thus, that is why I was thinking about potatoes and thinking about grounding right now, right? The idea of having some stability. Our potatoes will abide by gravity. Here, potatoes didn't abide by gravity because the Bloomers were really looking at the German middle class at this point and really making fun of the German middle class. MoMA owns that, by the way, and on occasion they bring it out. Merrill Letterman Eucalyptus, very important. This is from 1973. This is called Washing Tracks Maintenance Outside. She was washing the steps at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford. And then, of course, Robert Gober. This is one of Robert Gober's sinks. He is somebody else who worked at Kohler at some point, of course, because he was using all of these bathroom and kitchen fixtures. And in this case, you see a much more kind of surreal, strange, bodily relationship, a kind of sexualized relationship to porcelain and to holes. In this case, you see these kind of little baby shoes and this kind of waxy, these waxy limbs. And here's just a handful of very sexy photographs, let me tell you. I did not take these. Kohler, when you are in their arts and industry program or in Makerspace, they will send their design team over and take these kind of photographs to make that which is so banal, so seductive. How do you sell a toilet, right? You have to make it very seductive. In photography, the right kind of studio photography can do that. So I'll just walk you through a handful of these objects. These are all part of that installation I was showing you. Again, very, very sexy photographs. And then right now I'm working on some more of these carts. So this entire janitorial cart is cast except for the wheels and the bag. It is parked at a museum in Sheboygan that you should do a field trip to, Mark, if you can raise some money and go to Sheboygan, Wisconsin. I know that seems insane, but it's called the Art Preserve. It's a brand new museum. And Ruth Kohler, while she was alive, collected artist-built environments. Sometimes we call them vernacular artists. And it is in mass. And they're starting to collect the Chicago images. So right now they just acquired the entire Roger Brown house that is going up to the Art Preserve. A lot of my colleagues like Barbara Rossi is now fully embraced at the Art Preserve. It's just a stunning, stunning collection. They commissioned me to do this cart in that bathroom I was showing you early on. And this cart lives again at the front of the house at this very proper looking, beautiful museum. And people actually throw their garbage in the garbage bag there. So I'm very happy about that. Okay, mop head, I'm working on mop heads right now. Again, I'm making a handful of these carts. You'll see them live at the Independent Fair in May in New York. This whole back of the house thing is coming to an independent fair, the Independent Fair. So this is the uncast mop heads. This is the bucket. Okay. And then kind of the last part of my lecture, just kind of the wrap up, is to kind of look at some of those motifs, some of those kind of cliches that I was setting you up earlier. And one is the gingham that Mark was talking about in his introduction. So I've been working on gingham for a very long time. Gingham is their canvas covered in burlap with very kind of thick, singular, systematic pulls of oil paint. You can kind of get a sense here. So again, gingham is a pattern that migrates. I'm sure some of us are wearing gingham right now somewhere under a sweater. Certainly we have it in our kitchen in some capacity. So gingham migrates. It migrates from kitchen into high fashion and migrates from low to high. Gingham is a very simple, simple weave, 2 colors, simple weave. Its origin is a little dicey. But it was used often as uniforms for labor in the Industrial Revolution. Anyways, think about Bonnard's. This is Dog's Lunch. This is just a dang good painting, especially with that kind of dark form of the dog. This is from 1910. And do you start to see how that table is starting to flip up, right? It's not really behaving in a kind of perspectival space, right? It's starting to flatten out a little bit. And then one of my favorite paintings at the Met, Langres, still life with checkered tablecloth. So the translation typically from French is checkered. So if you see anything titled checkered, they usually are referring to gingham. This is from 1915 as well. And then thinking about the red gingham as kind of the classic gingham pattern, but think about what red can be. And when we look at a gingham tablecloth, are we looking at the color red, or are we just understanding it as tablecloth or backdrop? This is our house studio in Italy. My husband and I purchased a place in Umbria a handful of years ago now. And then the idea of bringing gingham onto these kind of classic construction bricks. Potato prints and jam jars, again, all oil. All right, and then from gingham, that which is highly unoriginal. It is about a kind of translation, a material translation to snag you so you can see it differently, to see that which kind of hovers in our everyday space, to look at it differently, to think about Albers, right? To think about not just weaving, but to think about abstraction, right? Not just representation, not just function, right? Not just location in a kind of an economic strata, but to think of it broadly. Think about it as predictable. Think about it as endless. Think about it as continuous, right? Gingham is almost a great democratic pattern. We still have a tendency to want to lock it into middle America or the domestic, right? Or to the home, aw shucks nature of what it can be. So then thinking about gingham, this is an exhibition in Germany, in Bonn, Germany. The summer we were in Italy, like thinking about gingham napkins and thinking about collage and thinking about what other compositions can happen. What can happen when gingham starts to move, to shift, to overlay. The cornflake box, nice tradition, whether it's Sturtevant, whether it's Warhol, really kind of think about those staples and think about, again, that which we know so well and can name cornflake, but think about it in relationship to, again, abstraction and form. What happens when some of the text gets stripped away? What kind of composition are we looking at? This is the Schneider Museum exhibition coming up under Dumb Potato, again, in honor of the Blumas, but also thinking about being a little cheeky with some of the objects that some of the cliches I end up playing through. So I really love these 5-pound ham cans. Again, I can tell you stories about 5-pound ham cans in terms of I resist doing this, and this is important for you to know. I'm trying to talk about the work. I'm trying to talk about form. I'm trying to talk about familiar vocabulary. I am not trying to talk about me. You're not hearing biography for another day. My identity, my age, my relationship to middle America, not at all interested in. Those are worthy conversations when you deal with your own identity coming forward in your work. I will honor that. I will listen to it as a good human being. Again, very important conversations to have. But I also think art can do more than that. Art does not have to be an illustration of one's profound identity. And you have profound identities. I am not denying that at all. I don't know if I do, but I know you all do. However, I think art can do that and more. Don't forget the more part. Right? Your identity should be played out every day when you're on the street, right? It should be, played out in all kinds of manifestations of our lives. But art can do that too, but it should do more. Honor art so it can do that and more. So again, I'm going to resist telling you about, my relationship with the 5-pound ham can and my father. I'm not going to tell you that. It doesn't matter. It is a form. It is, barely food. I do not eat meat, but every time you open a tuna can, an anchovy can, a ham tin, I don't think any of you would eat canned ham, maybe, but the idea of pulling it open, every time you do, there's a different form that emerges, right? You know this, bottom of your sink, I don't know if you're washing your tuna cans out or just throwing them right in the recycling, but you know that something happens differently every time you open that top. That's kind of remarkable. It is a staple, it is consistent, it is meant to be consistent, but as soon as your hands touch it, something else happens to that form. So what I'm doing here is just silver leafing this very common can. This was in a show in 2003 here at James Cohan Gallery. So you can see this is a great example, another cliche, sameness and difference, right? But how interesting is that, right? Sameness and difference without, sameness or difference when we're talking about identity, it can be trans identity, right? So that's really important to me. Another installation, I was buying cheese boards at the Aldi's. These are marble cheese boards, and then thinking about their organizational structure. The Aldi's is fascinating to me as a place of consumption, and to think about abstracting their offerings because they're affordable, but to think about using those forms and to transform them from Aldi's as what, a discount food store that has their shame aisles of other stuff. If you buy them in mass, and what else can happen there, right? A relationship between black and white, pattern, rhythm, dependability. I'll just walk through quickly a handful of these wooden works that are embedded with sometimes oil painted lids, sometimes just washed out Smucker jar lids, sometimes cast bronze lids, sometimes they're silver leafed. Again, and thinking about that kind of rhythm that can be set up. Also thinking about that cutting board in your kitchen. What kind of composition happens every time you're making yourself a sandwich with the material on your cutting board? What happens when those cutting boards become vertical? This is actually quite large scale. I think it's close to 9 feet. And so you get a sense that the middle circle is actually a hammered out garbage can lid. Other side, they're two-sided. I was commissioned to be part of the sculpture exhibition in Milwaukee last summer. So I made these large scale bookends. You saw the yellow one, there's a red one, and then this, you're looking at the blue bookend here. And this is at the public library. And there was a banned book ban that came during a rainy day in the fall. Again, when I'm thinking about the bookends, yes, we should talk about banned books. What literature is available to elementary school kids? What literature is available to us? But I'm also thinking about Ellsworth Kelly, right? I'm also thinking about abstraction and flatness. That is as important to me. Same thing with my barrettes. These are large scale steel barrettes that are powder coated. Under my hat, I'm wearing a barrette. They're the cheap goodie kind, but they are a spectacular form. And color becomes very important as well. I've been casting, again, part of the janitorial series, actually thinking about brooms. These are, I think, all aluminum, and then the mat is porcelain, maybe a bronze broom there. This is the older work. Everything you've been seeing, like I said, is really coming within these last 2 years at the most. This is an older piece. When we made a transition we have a studio in Chicago, but it's a smaller studio. When we moved from Chicago to a bigger studio in Milwaukee, because Milwaukee is affordable and you can have an amazing studio for very little. I was just deluged with all of these textiles that I did not necessarily make. That I was using for patterns of paintings, and I didn't know what to do with them. So I ended up casting as many as I could actually afford in bronze. And this is an example of that. So it was this kind of transition that allowed me to think through your responsibility to the waste of your own practice. What you're looking at here are also bronze folded, dewoven burlap pieces that are mounted on a lava stone. Can get a sense there. And then once they're cast, I go in and then with oil paint each thread. And as I was just explaining about all those textiles, using those textiles as templates for paintings, I've been doing this since I came out of grad school in the very, very early 90s, accumulating again all of this material. But here's an example of some of the paintings. So the doily was something that was a cliche that I couldn't quite embrace. Like, it was just so hard. It was just so loaded. But I had a beautiful invitation to have an exhibition at the Alice Austin House in Staten Island. And upon my research there, being the good Victorian person that Alice Austin was, they had a collection of lace, and I really kind of had to confront the thing that taste was getting in the way of those possibilities of interpretive formal value. Like, what happens at that intricacy? Why was it too delicate for me? What was I resisting? So this is a bronze piece. And these are large scale photographs of doilies that I actually pull together, make them all black with gesso, rub in graphite, and then I photograph them. This is each one of those photos. I know they're hard to see. Each one of those photos is 24 by 24. This is at the gallery in Bonn. They're also the doilies. And then also having access to plaster. So if you're at Kohler, plaster is just one step to get to the casting of slip, right? But plaster is a really stunning material. So I have a tendency to crochet. I can look at you and crochet, and they're not functional. I'm just thinking about color and composition and form and embedding them in plaster, pulling them out because they're made with cotton fibers. They leave their kind of imprint. So I have hundreds of these. If you would take my graduate seminar, I'm crocheting during class. Everybody asks what they're for. These are just two examples. And then I've also been working on plaster in a secco fresco kind of manner. So as we know, fresco is just pigment into wet plaster. What happens when I cast these plaster tiles and then use paint that quickly gets absorbed? So what you're looking at here is just, I can make 50 of these a day. They go so quickly. It is like paper. It is the plaster support, but it is like paper. I have my brushes ready. Oh, here's a good example. This is my setup, right? So I'll set up and I'll just pump out 50 a day. I have a selection of them that will be in the survey exhibition. Last summer, I was working in Italy on kind of, again, I find it very cliche, but it's called Majolica or Maiolica. If you go to Deruta in Italy, you all buy your kind of Renaissance Maiolica, beautiful pattern plates or so forth. And really kind of, again, thinking about the cliche, thinking quickly, using, terracotta tile. This is what these are. Italy's a tricky place because it's hard, the materials are different and kind of figuring it out. It's also the kind of center of Western picture making. Assisi is 20 miles away, so you spend a lot of time with Giotto. Okay, leave you with another rainbow, cliches, and then I'm just going to wrap it up with some exhibitions that I'm curating. This is an exhibition that opens up at the Schneider. I'm very excited about this. It looks at repetition, and I'm actually taking, as a conceit for this exhibition, I'm thinking about Woodhouse's character Jeeves and how inane that character is, how privileged, but the hello, the kind of silliness of privilege, British privilege, and then kind of juxtaposing that thinking with Gertrude Stein and her kind of avant-garde way of thinking about repetition and kind of pulling them all together. So this is coming up. I'm very excited. The Schneider has a lot of money and they're bringing in many of these artists, and some of them are friends. So I'm really excited to get out there. And then recently, the Milwaukee Art Museum, I curated 50 paintings. It was 50 paintings by 50 artists. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, biography for another day. I brought a lot of artists in for various kinds of programming, and the artists themselves said like, at this point, if you're only representing me with one work, you're not representing me at all. You're representing painting, contemporary painting, right? So everybody had one painting. And again, I'm talking about the lack of truth in, what I'm conveying to you or what an image, but certainly what one painting out of a Mary Heilemann career can do is not what Mary Heilemann does, right? It is just one example of what paint is at that given time. It was a long run of an exhibition. The museum was not going to let me get away with not having any object labels. But I made a pretty good approach at getting rid of as much language as possible so we could just encounter the work itself. So 50 paintings by 50 artists was a really good experiment. I'm very much interested in comparative learning. You put something against another thing, right? That kind of comparative learning, we don't do enough of that. And 50 paintings was a bounty of comparative learning. I had representational work and abstract work. I had young artists and old artists. Like it was just painting, So anyways, I'm really thinking more about that and what that can be. As Mark was saying, and this is just an example of Front International, which unfortunately no longer exists. It was the inaugural Front International in Cleveland, Akron, and Oberlin. This is Philip Vanderheiden's installation at the Federal Reserve. I basically had a beautiful run of the institutions, including the museums, in these spaces. And unfortunately, it closed. I think it twice. It didn't quite work. So anyways, yes, Whitney Biennial, yes, Front International, so kind of high-end, many-year projects. But then also in this case, I opened a show at one of my students' spaces in Chicago last week, called Line Work. So, you know, I will take any opportunity to kind of bring work together because I learned from it. Yes, maybe it gives opportunities for, again, juxtaposition with artists and artist works. But I learned when it's really important to work with and closely with artists who do work very different than yours, who think very differently. Bring them into the fold, right? So anyways, I think that may be it. Yay. The end.